arms towards the sun. You feel the warmth of the rays, and then you know you're alive, and you don't have to be afraid of anything, cause you know the truth, and the truth is love, yes it is. Wasn't what they said to you, or anything that you learned from a book or from the news. It's not like that, cause it's a thing. It is something that you do.
Welcome to the Bassline. It is a rainy Friday afternoon here in New York City, 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I am so glad you are with us today. Please stay tuned. We have an incredible guest on the line with us. And we've had many incredible guests on this show. I must say I'm just amazed at the guests who have appeared on this show. I can't even believe it, what we've achieved in the matter of time that we've been on here. But today is a first because, first of all, we have an attorney on the line. So that's a new area of expertise, a new wheelhouse that we haven't ventured into on this program. But additionally, we have an incredible guest with incredible news. And that's what we're going to jump into first and foremost, is we have on the line Sujata Gibson, who was the attorney who led the landmark case against New York State that went all the way up to the Supreme Court against these absurd mandates, which cost, if I'm not mistaken, 75,000 healthcare workers in New York State lost their jobs on account of those, what I always refer to as dehumanizing mandates. And we just scored an incredible victory, and we have our guest in large part to thank for that. Sujata Gibson, are you on the line with us?
I am. Thank you so much for having me on the show.
Well, thank you for being here. I'm overjoyed to have you as a guest. So, first of all, I have many things I'd love to discuss with you. But first of all, I want you to take your good old American time and lay everything out for us in terms of how was this class action lawsuit initiated? How did you get involved? How did the trial unfold? And then tell us about the outcome. Take your time, please.
Sure. Well, this case, Medical Professionals for Informed Consent versus Bassett, who was the Commissioner of Health at the time for New York State, really took a few different, it evolved a few different ways, but ultimately it ended up in state court, and we didn't go to the Supreme Court of the United States on the state court version of this case. That was the federal. But anyway, so we went to the New York State Supreme Court, and and the judge struck the mandate for healthcare workers down as arbitrary and capricious, and also unconstitutional under the New York State Constitution. So then this decision was appealed by the Department of Health, and at the oral arguments, the state's attorney showed up, and instead of arguing the merits of his case, he just said, suddenly and out of the blue, we've decided to repeal the mandate, so really this case should, this appeal should be over. And the appellate courts were, the judges were sort of stunned, and they said, so are you withdrawing your appeal? And they hemmed and hawed and said, well, we think you should just basically erase the lower court win. It's called vacate, because, it's really not fair to us, since you're not going to be reviewing this appeal that now that it's, no longer a controversy because we've agreed to withdraw the mandate. We don't think that lower court win should stand. And, of course, we stood up and said, well, you're welcome to withdraw your appeal, but we're definitely not going to allow you to erase this precedent, because 34,000 healthcare workers have lost their jobs as a result of this mandate, at least 34,000. That's the official number that the governor agrees it's at least that many. And this could happen again, and we need to be able to stop this overreach because, what the court held was that the Department of Health does not have the authority to make sweeping vaccine mandates. That is the job of the legislature, very specifically, and it violates all of our rights to allow an unelected official bureaucrat from an agency to make those kind of policy decisions that will deeply impact all of our lives. And so we needed that precedent. And so that was the argument. And finally, the appellate court thought about it for a long time. And finally, just a few weeks ago, they decided to dismiss the appeal, but they did not alter the decision below. So that stands as the law of New York State now, which is really a huge victory for medical freedom.
Absolutely. I mean, I want to thank you personally. I mean, so many of us were impacted by these unfair policies and bullied, and for there to be a legitimate victory of this magnitude is amazingly good news, in my opinion.
It is. It's not the end of the story. We're going to have to keep fighting. Obviously, the more precedent like this we can get, the more protected we will be next time. But this is an incredibly political fight. There's a lot of very powerful interests here that depend on mandates for the economic success of these programs. I mean, it's really shocking how many conflicts of interest there are. And I don't know if you've been following, we've had some pretty good victories for the teachers also. I know you were a teacher. You worked for the Department of Education, I believe.
I was actually I was an after-school teacher. I worked for I worked for a few different private companies in that respect, but I was in Department of Education buildings every day, contributing to those communities. Right, and
so you were probably, I don't know if you were shut out, but, almost everyone was shut out of, thousands of educators.
Yeah, I mean, I lost my job of 20 years, effectively. And, I just found that to be absurd because the same company that was suddenly pressuring me to take an experimental medical intervention certainly didn't provide me with health care and actually didn't give me a raise for many, many, many years. I'd worked for the company for over 10 years. I asked politely, could I ask for a raise? And they said, sorry, we don't have any money. While they were building a huge facility with like a swimming pool and like a recording studio and an indoor jungle gym and like this massive multi-million-dollar facility. I said, could I ask for a small raise? They said, no, sorry, we don't have the money. I said, could I get a 1/4 raise just as a symbolic gesture to keep up with the increase in the train fare to get here? No, sorry. So it's kind of a power imbalance when you turn around and say, oh, now we need you to take this medical intervention to return to your job.
And as you pointed out, it's so irrational to say that the consequence will be that you won't have health insurance at all.
Right.
They're saying this is a public health initiative, and then they're just stripping tens of thousands of people of health insurance. That happened to the healthcare workers, too. They were shut out of their profession. Many of them had to move out of state because they couldn't even get health insurance. They couldn't work at any healthcare facility in the whole state. And similarly, in New York City, these mandates covered everyone, as you know. So it's not like you could just even go to a private school. Which
from heroes to zeros.
Exactly, heroes to zeros, and it was so, and is, because it's not over, we're still fighting the Department of Education because they also repealed their mandate right around the time as we were going to oral arguments in federal court for those cases. They also showed up there and said this should be moot because we're repealing our mandate in a couple days. So that's their same argument in New York City, and the appellate court hasn't made a decision there. But in those cases, I had to have 3 federal judges. I had to, make a motion for 3 different federal judges assigned to the case to step down because of how much Pfizer stock they own.
Wow.
And 2 of them did. Now the third one was then assigned, and actually, apparently, according to her financial disclosures, owned even more Pfizer stock than any of them, and she She didn't feel there was a conflict. Maybe she sold the stock, maybe she didn't. It's unclear. But, she did then dismiss the case, even though we had already gone to the Court of Appeals previously, and they said we were likely to succeed and had, undone the initial denial of relief. And they said we do have constitutional claims. So it was pretty shocking that she then just dismissed the case after refusing to step down.
Right. Well, let me ask you, you've mentioned that we have more work to do, and I'm certain of that. How would you describe the legal landscape moving forward? What are some of the things that we should keep an eye on? What are some of the battles ahead? What do you see on a national scale? And if you could, globally? I mean, there is the idea that we've violated Nuremberg precedent through these actions. So where do we go from here? Give us a layout, if you could, from your point of view.
I think it's really important that we don't let this all just get swept away and forgotten. It gets, as things ease up and people's lives maybe go back to normal-ish and they start to try to rebuild and there aren't as many mandates, it's easy to take the focus off, but we need to hold everybody accountable. So we need to keep going with the litigation that we do have for all the people that were harmed, and really press, having some real consequences for this.
I agree.
And then also keep going in terms of activism and keeping the word up, because this is not the end of this story. It's not the end of this litigation, but it's also not the end of this story. It's very clear this is what I would call the end of the beginning,
right.
phase one.
I
think we need to be, vigilant, because there were so many wholesale just destructions of our most basic constitutional rights and freedoms. Our most sacred human rights were just thrown out the door, and so many good people didn't say anything.
Yeah, seriously.
And didn't, it was like sort of the fog and shock of it all, of all the propaganda and all the, fear around the virus and everything. But I mean, there was a poll in New York City, I think it was in 2022, after we realized the vaccine doesn't even stop transmission, for sure we realized that.
Right.
There was a poll of Democrats, and it was some really scary percentage of Democrats wanted to still jail and take away children from unvaccinated people.
Wow.
I think it was 70% or 80%. Each category was different, but it was really high percentages. And it's so frightening how fast that happened. Even after we found out that there was really no possibility of stopping transmission with these vaccines, people still felt that way. People were still saying that, unvaccinated people shouldn't be treated for heart attacks. If they end up in the hospital, they should die. And
look what's happening now.
Yeah, I know.
In terms of heart attacks.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, I can't believe it. I have to tell you, Ms. Gibson, is, I feel like I live in the twilight zone now. I've realized, I came to that realization. My life is now in the twilight zone based on these events that happened. I just can't believe how people stood idly by. And there were so many people who I knew to be champions of human rights in every other situation who are suddenly going along with this narrative. And, there was varying degrees of it. Some people became what I call the foot soldiers of the narrative. And they were foot soldiers and attack dogs and very hostile to anyone who wasn't complying. And then you have people who, they said, well, I support the vaccines and I'm pro-science and pro-vaccine, but I don't support the mandates. But they would never speak out publicly and say that they don't support the mandate. I never saw someone really say that I could recall. They said, well, I support this vaccine, but I'm against the mandates. I think I remember seeing one person at an actual protest. I think it was an MTA worker or something who ripped up his vaccine card. He said, I'm vaccinated but I support people's right to make a decision. But in general, there were so many people who personally said they disagreed with the mandates, but did not say this anywhere publicly, and these are people who are otherwise very outspoken people. I mean, what would you describe in terms of some of your observations as far as the strange effects on our culture, on our society, and how it's torn families apart, as a caller last week pointed out, and many people have experienced, ended friendships of many, many years.
Right.
I mean, what is your experience with some of that? Were you protected from some of that, being an attorney and playing sort of an objective role in a legal process, or did you experience what many others experience in terms of just having friends and family turn on you in some cases?
To some extent, I had already kind of crossed that threshold by speaking up for people's right to choose on vaccines some years earlier. I've been in this fight a long time.
Oh, excellent.
And when I started speaking publicly about this, I think around 2015 or 2016, about how, at that time we had a religious exemption for children in schools. That's where the main mandates were for schools. But the religious and medical exemptions were becoming increasingly narrow, and there were really unconstitutional and crazy things going on. I started to go with parents to they'd have these hearings, and it was like a heretic tribunal, like they'd have all these people from the school sitting around and grilling these parents about why they think they know what God wants, like, do they think there's some kind of Messiah? Just really offensive questions, asking about their personal sexual histories. Like, parents in almost every one of these interrogations about their religious beliefs would break down sobbing at some point. They felt so violated. This is their sacred, personal religious beliefs. We live in a country that's supposed to tolerate a great diversity of religious ideas. You're supposed to have your right to have your own personal religious beliefs. The government is not supposed to be entangled with it. Their question really should be limited to, is there some obvious reason why you seem insincere, and this is fake? But other than that, they're not supposed to be haranguing people to see if they're committing heresy, essentially, which is what they were doing. And so I started to talk about it, and it really, it upset a lot of people to even talk about these violations of basic constitutional rights. It's such an issue. And then, I started to represent people with medical exemptions who were being told by their doctors that their kids couldn't safely take another vaccine or, a vaccine, depending on what the reason was. And the school principals were overruling them. I represented families who had already lost one, or in one case more than one child, to proven vaccine death, and been compensated by the U.S. government as a proven, vaccine death. And the other children who were just as vulnerable, who multiple specialists said couldn't take the vaccine, were being denied a medical exemption by school principals who had no medical training whatsoever and just simply would say, we don't think this is a good enough reason.
Wow.
And then, the consequence is pretty extreme. They can't go to school anywhere in New York State. Not private, not public. I mean, these families, their lives were completely upended. Many of them had to move, and, many didn't have the resources. Everything they knew here was here, and they had to leave or start homeschooling and, leave their jobs and figure out what to do. It was horrific.
Yeah.
A lot of these children have special needs.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of them have been vaccine injured.
Right.
And that's been documented, and they need services that the school can provide, but the school won't provide them services. It's inhumane. And you were asking about the consequences. Sure. I mean, I faced consequences like anyone did for talking about this stuff during COVID, but I had to some extent already started talking about this and started to realize that that's going to carry some stigma.
Well, you lead me to another question, which is in regard to the pre-existing mandates before COVID came about. You made reference to the school mandates, and I myself have 2 young children. They've received some basic vaccines. I've been vaccinated myself. I was not a quote-unquote anti-vaxxer before this whole event, but I have to say I've come to question vaccines in general. And as Aaron Kheriaty pointed out in a discussion I heard when he was a guest on the Vaccine Safety Research Foundation weekly talk about, I don't know, a month or so ago, right before Steve Kirsch was my guest, he mentioned that, Kheriaty mentioned that it's very strange, and he noticed for a while that the way the vaccine conversation was being policed, as he put it. And can we now, after what's occurred with these COVID vaccines, can we start retroactively reversing some of these mandates? Because, people made this argument that, we've always had mandates. Maybe they weren't right in the first place. Maybe that's something that should be reversed. Yeah. Just because something has existed doesn't mean it should continue to exist if it is harmful. So, what do you think about that? I mean, if I'm not mistaken, I've heard there are several advanced societies, I believe in Japan. I've heard they do not have vaccine mandates to the same order that we do in this country. I've heard it's the same in the UK. I'm not certain about vaccine policies around the world, but I believe
Sweden, there's tons of countries that don't have mandates.
Right, okay, and are those countries being wiped off the face of the map? Has everyone died of polio?
Not at all.
So, I think we really need to ask the question, when you're injecting me with something, what are you protecting me from? As a matter of fact,
absolutely.
I had a friend who called me hysterically from the South when COVID was happening, and they were ramping it up every day. And he said, "You have to get vaccinated. You don't know what's going on. People are dying. I'm in Alabama. The hospitals are filled." And I said, "But I'm fine. I'm not sick. What are you protecting me from? You can't just jump in everyone's face and terrorize everyone. What is the risk? What is the benefit? Is it safe? Is it effective? Is it necessary?" Basically, the 3 questions. So is there any chance for us to...
It's the basic questions of medicine. We're absolutely, I work a lot with Children's Health Defense. And I should say, Children's Health Defense is the reason we were able to bring that healthcare lawsuit. They totally partnered with me. They were, backing the suit every step of the way. And and Bobby Kennedy really played a big part in that as well. He and I actually brought the first version of the lawsuit in federal court together as co-counsel, and he was running for office or just about to when I took it into state court. But they've really been instrumental, and that is absolutely something that we continue to fight for, and we have various ideas, and there may be more. May be more possible now to challenge some of these mandates, or at least to expand the exemptions available under them, because there is more willingness to kind of look at this issue. All we're asking is that people actually look at the issue, instead of just making a lot of assumptions or just having a knee-jerk issue, just look at it. What is the real justification? Half the vaccines on the schedule are admitted to be non-sterilizing, which means that, like the COVID vaccine, they can't stop transmission. They're only supposed to be for personal benefit.
Right.
Some of them, like tetanus, tetanus isn't even a contagious disease. It's a personal, so I'm not saying that people shouldn't get vaccinated. I'm just saying that there's no justification for mandating this.
Right.
And, the other ones, I could go through the reasons why mandates don't even make sense from a public health perspective either. But the point is that especially people who want to take these vaccines should be fighting against mandates, because you will never have a safe vaccine if you take away choice and you take away liability, which is what the vaccine companies have achieved. They have zero liability. Because the government signed a deal where if a child dies or somebody is injured, they can't sue the vaccine manufacturer no matter how negligent or reckless or willful they were. They have to go through vaccine court, like my client, who I told you 2 children and their family died. They have to sue and prove their case to the federal government, and then the taxpayers pay that payout for the death, which is capped at $250,000 per dead child.
Wow.
And it is, so they have zero incentive from a liability perspective to keep these vaccines safe. So then and then they have no checks and balances because the agencies that are overseeing them are revolving doors with them and have notorious conflicts of interest. They are essentially
captured.
Also partners, literal partners in the patents of the vaccine, so they're making their money from them. And then the only third rail is consent. If people had to consent to take them or not, they would have to work a little bit to convince people that they're safe or do something if people were getting injured. But they've taken that last protection away, too, by mandating this. So there's no ability to meaningfully opt out. They have a captive market. You have to have all children get these. I think in some places it's up to 72 different injections over the course of their childhood if they want to have any kind of regular life. People who want to take a vaccine, I would say especially should be up in arms about mandates. And this has to be a choice. We have to hold them accountable.
That's a great point. Are you familiar with the work of Dr. Paul Thomas?
A little bit. I haven't followed as closely as I should. I'll make a note of it.
Right. I mean, I've just seen an interview with the gentleman. I haven't followed him closely, but I mean, basically, he had a private I believe, he's a practicing pediatrician, and he had a large practice, and he didn't pressure people to take vaccines. He allowed people to make their own choices for their families. And over a period of time, according to his own recollection, his own account of his own data, his own records of his own patients, he looked at the heavily vaccinated, the moderately vaccinated, and the unvaccinated. And it turns out, according to his observations, the unvaccinated children were clearly the healthiest children, and the children who were heavily vaccinated generally had a variety of quote-unquote inexplicable health problems. But it seems that there are others who are venturing to say, hey, you know what? A lot of these inexplicable medical problems that people have at various points in their life, it goes back to those vaccines they gave you. Now, I'm not saying that that's correct. I have no medical expertise. I'll make that clear 100 times a day. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not a doctor. I'm not giving medical advice. When people would say to me, you're not a doctor, I say, well, I'm not trying to give you medicine. So that doesn't matter. I'm trying to protect my own sovereignty.
Safety questions is a very different thing. And so Dr. Thomas's study is only one example of that same finding. There are some real questions. We have never tested this whole schedule. We're just adding and adding and adding to it because it's such a profitable thing. Each one you add is another $1 billion for. And so, and nobody's stopping and saying, wait a minute, what are the actual effects of this? And not just on the, whether you get sick from that virus, but there have been some really disturbing tests. There's one, I think, Dr. Abbey, who was an African. He was in Africa working on. He's from the U.S., and he was for decades working on vaccines in Africa and was very committed to vaccines. And then he did this kind of test on vaccinated and unvaccinated girls and boys in, I can't remember which country. And he thought it was going to come out to show that, overall mortality was dramatically decreased for those who had been vaccinated. Mm-hmm. But it was actually shockingly the other way. It was 10 times. You're 10 times more likely if you were a girl who was vaccinated to die of everything else than measles, basically, or tuberculosis, or it might have been. Sorry. Yeah, I'm not sure which.
We can go back and check.
Which vaccine it was. It might have been the DTaP. But anyway, so you weren't getting those 3 viruses as much maybe that the vaccine prevented against, but you were dying of everything else. And so there's pretty alarming data, and this has been replicated in other studies where you're starting to see that there may be this effect on overall immunity that hasn't really been studied and should be studied. So again, I'm not a doctor either, and I'm not telling anyone what to do. But I do think that there are real safety questions. I know that there are real safety questions because I work with children all the time who have been proven to have been injured. And I don't think that these concerns are being addressed or monitored or taken seriously, and we can't just leave it up to the vaccine manufacturers. Every single one of these companies is a convicted felon, and their felonies have been for covering up drug injuries. They can't be trusted to police themselves. They will not do it. So I do think we should be asking questions.
Speaking of that, could you clarify that a little bit? Because I was under the impression that Pfizer was involved in the largest settlement in the history of the Department of Justice. And then recently, this baby powder settlement with Johnson & Johnson, that was like a whopping $13 billion or something, or compared to, I guess Pfizer was like 2.3 billion or something. So it's like, are these different courts? I get very confused about the law and the different courts and whatnot. Like, is that a Department of Justice case against J&J, or is that a different jurisdiction?
I think that is a federal case. It might have been from the Department of Justice. But, the thing about all these other products are consumers can bring a lawsuit because they don't have that blanket liability that vaccines do. So when you bring your lawsuit, you're then able to get discovery, and you can get those internal memos that say, we know this baby powder is killing babies, but we're going to keep offering it anyway. And then, you can get them. But with vaccines, we're not allowed any discovery. We can't get their records. So, yeah, Pfizer has settled multiple lawsuits like this. This is not the only one, but they're not the only company. Merck, which is one of the largest vaccine manufacturers for childhood vaccines, they're behind the Vioxx settlement, for example, where they were shown to have knowingly kept Vioxx on the market even though it was killing people. They had internal memos saying that they wanted to destroy any doctor who tried to speak out, and they had whole plans for how to do it. They were covering up the deaths.
Brandy Vaughn.
I mean, these people are not to be trusted. It's not like they just suddenly change into angels as soon as they're talking about vaccines. Like, this is
it's unbelievable. It's unbelievable. I just say people just took their thinking caps right off. I refer to them as the formerly astute, that they choose to not regard enormously important information like the criminal backgrounds of these companies, like the non-liability factor. Again, I never saw someone say, I support vaccines, I'm pro-science, etc., but the non-liability thing is not right and we should change that. It was like if you bought into it, you had to buy in hook, line, and sinker.
Amazingly, that is changing. And to bring it back a little to the lawsuit for the medical professionals, one of the things I love about the group Medical Professionals for Informed Consent, which is comprised of thousands of doctors and nurses.
Everyone write that name down, by the way. Look it up.
Yeah, Medical Professionals for Informed Consent, is not everyone in the group. Some of the people are vaccinated for COVID. It's not like they have a uniform stance of what one should do.
Right.
But they all agree that for all of our sakes, that, informed consent is a fundamental principle of medicine and a fundamental human right.
Right.
And they absolutely cannot support these mandates, even for healthcare workers. And so I really appreciate their work, because there's, especially people in healthcare, for them to speak up is career suicide. It has been so difficult. I mean, laws have even been passed in some states to penalize medical professionals who deviated from whatever, Fauci was
We had Dr.
saying.
Merrill Nass on this show, who lost her medical license in the state of Maine.
Yeah. And that was like a kangaroo court. I watched some of those proceedings. It was awful what they did to her.
It's disgraceful.
A dedicated, lifelong, amazing doctor who's never had any kind of complaints or write-ups. None of her patients complained. This was a hit job by the state of Maine,
and for people to not understand the magnitude of that, and to understand that something is very serious that's going on here when this type of thing is happening. I mean, that's what this show, by the way, is dedicated to the medical freedom conversation. And I know many artists. I'm a performing artist myself. I've had the honor of working with many great artists, but I will make it perfectly clear. If you're not on the right side of this issue, you're not welcome on this show, because I'm not going to water down this show. And I think it's too serious. I have 2 young children myself, and I'm very concerned for the world that they're inheriting. I think we're entering some sort of biosecurity, technocracy kind of thing, and I don't like it. I would like people to have the option of being human beings in the old-fashioned sense. I would like to ask you as well, I don't know if this would factor in legally, but I think it should also be added. In addition to the dehumanizing nature of the mandates in and of themselves, we also have to remember people were prevented from working leading up to the mandate. So, I'd been out of work for a year. Then I'd been out of work basically for 2 years. And upon trying to return to work, you need to take a medical intervention before you return to work. So it was a medical intervention that was being forced or coerced on people who already had their backs against the wall. And that's a big population that is not really getting considered, because it's always like either you're pro or anti, and there are a large number of people in this country, in this city and in the country, and I'm sure in the world, who took this because they were pressured to, they didn't want to, they didn't feel good about it, and it was simply they were victims of coercion. Many of these people have children to feed and literally were put in a back against the wall situation. So again, even if you support this particular medical intervention, you support forcing it on people and basically terrorizing people in this manner, saying you're going to be homeless, you can't feed your kids unless you do what we tell you to do, and it just happens to be a thing that's extremely profitable for major corporations. I'm calling everybody out on this, because people tried to, again, they bullied us, they harassed us, they had all kinds of names to call us. You're an anti-vaxxer, you're a Trump supporter, you're a right-winger, you're a this and you're a that. And it's like, no, it doesn't make you any of those things to ask basic questions about something that people want to inject into your body. I mean, what could be more?
The most fundamental right we have is sovereignty over our own body.
I agree.
I mean, there is no humanity left when you can't control your own body.
I agree, and you said it perfectly right there. And I just really want to explain to people, if you are a so-called freedom fighter and you don't understand what Sujata Gibson just said, please retire from so-called freedom fighting. We don't need this kind of freedom fighting. We need people who have an esteemed vision of the human being. And I insist that if you supported these mandates and you think you're an activist, you're not an activist in a way that I appreciate, and you're not an activist in a way that I think the world needs, because we need more sovereignty and more human dignity, not less.
Right. And there's real consequences. I mean, I think what people don't understand is that this has ramifications way beyond the vaccine context. So, for example, because of this case in 1905, the Supreme Court said that it was okay for this Reverend Henning Jacobson to have to take a smallpox vaccine or pay a $5 fine. He had to choose one or the other, and that was constitutional. But because of that case, Jacobson, in 1905, the Supreme Court has since justified horrific things. For example, forced sterilization of women was justified based on Jacobson. And what the Supreme Court said is, if we have the power to, forcibly inject you, we have the power to cut your fallopian tubes. And, in that case, the court held that just because you were a so-called imbecile or of bad moral character, the state could, for whatever reason it wanted, forcibly sterilize you.
Eugenics.
Yeah, it's eugenics. So eugenics is directly related to this issue. So when you start to allow encroachment on people's bodies in this way, especially in the way that it's being done with vaccines, where almost no justification has to be made. The state is just presumed to have a good reason. You're looking at a very bleak society that is probably every right that you take for granted is at stake, if that is at stake. And so, I do hope that people understand these connections. We're living in a time when it feels like WWF wrestling.
Oh,
and
I've said
it's
that
really
for years.
shocking. People just take these teams and then they're in lockstep on their team, whether it's right or left. And where are the free thinkers, the people that are saying, I'm going to look at each issue and I'm going to apply the same standards to people I don't agree with,
Yeah, seriously.
I believe in free speech, so I think everyone should have free speech. I believe, that people should have control over their bodies. I just don't understand. There's this idea that you can get away with just having things go for your side.
Right. And I also don't understand how you can make statements that are just nonsensical statements on face value and no one questions it. Like, remember when Justin Trudeau was passionately saying, well, you have a right to be unvaccinated, but you don't have a right to get on a plane or get on a train again and put vaccinated people at risk. It's like, well, didn't you just say your vaccine doesn't work in making this, this grand statement?
It's so circular. They ignore the basics of human rights and constitutional law. There's long ago, the courts and the international community said that the right to bodily autonomy, to informed consent, means the right to not be coerced as well as the right to not be forcibly injected, held down and forcibly injected. You can't be coerced either. You need free and informed consent for any medical procedure that is done on you.
That was a very disturbing trend, too, is a number of people who said to me directly, and I saw it said to others, no one forced you to do anything. It's like, yeah, I understand I wasn't forced. I was coerced. Coercion isn't okay either.
Right.
If I was forced, yes, it would be a different situation. And another thing I would say is when I was alluding to this violating the Nuremberg Code and just general, human rights and making any reference to, I remember a few people say, how dare you make reference to the Nazis? This is nothing like that. And I'll say, look, I'm not going to just go and loosely compare everything to Nazism. I think that's just historically not a very good understanding of history, and it's irresponsible. However, if you're opposed to Nazism, you're supposed to oppose even a lean in that direction. So, no, we're not in a full-blown Nazi society yet, but we're not supposed to be going in that direction at all. And that's my point.
The whole point of Nuremberg was to put into place rules that are a floor that can't be violated. And it's absurd to call that an equivalency. It's not an equivalency. You're just talking about an actual law that's been codified that says that you have to have informed consent and that it is a violation of your most basic human rights and constitutional rights not to. And that's been not only codified in the Nuremberg codes, but also in a number of U.S. statutes. And when I have put forth that argument in court, I put it in on a case in federal court a couple of years ago, and the judge even said, well, this is probably a Nazi equivalent. You're making a false equivalency with the Holocaust. I didn't say anything about the Holocaust.
Right.
I am not saying there's a Holocaust happening. None of those things were said. What I said is there are these statutes that say that we're entitled to informed consent, and this goes back to Nuremberg, and this is a most basic right that we get to enforce because there are statutes. And when a court can't even take that and has to say, oh no, until 6 million people have been murdered, we're not going to enforce a right, there is no equivalency being made. We're just talking about human rights. And I think anybody who's thinking will realize that. It's a very manipulative and false argument to make to suddenly attack somebody for advocating for human rights.
Outstanding points. So normally we like to, if we can, we like to take callers on this show. Would you be open to taking a call or two?
Oh, of course.
Okay, excellent. Well, before we take callers, and guys, if you want to call in and talk to the outstanding Sujata Gibson, the number is 888-874-4888. So if you have a question lined up, please give us a call. Again, this is one of the types of episodes where I really don't want to open the floor for just general philosophical statements. If you have a particular question for our guest, who is obviously a very skilled attorney, then please try to present a focused question. But let me ask you one more question, if I may, before we take calls, Sujata, which is, I spoke to Steve Kirsch, and I was saying, why can't we just put a great legal dream team together and just roll up our sleeves on behalf of the American people and say, nope, this law, goodbye, this law, goodbye. We're changing this around. We're changing that around. We're going to fix this stuff. Like, can we do that? I mean, I'm saying this from a total layman's perspective, but you and Aaron Seary and some of the other medical freedom champion attorneys, why can't we just get this dream team together and just start righting these wrongs? Steve Kerr says it's the government that's stopping us. The government is preventing us from the legislation that we need. What do you think? Are you optimistic that we can make some serious changes? I accuse Steve of being somewhat pessimistic, although I noticed a few days after our conversation he was involved in some sort of meeting of attorneys, so or like the legal front of our movement. So despite his so-called what I call pessimism, he's moving forward with the legal option. What do you think about that? Do we have legal options? Do we have any reason to be optimistic here?
I mean, that's absolutely what we're doing, and we have had successes. We had this. I would really urge people to support, like Children's Health Defense, especially because they are absolutely focused on supporting strategic litigation in these efforts. They're instrumental to hundreds, if not thousands, of lawsuits all over the country that have had a lot of different important successes, and Aaron Seary is a wonderful attorney too, and has had some great wins, and we all kind of do collaborate with each other too, but that's absolutely where we're headed. Like, we just had this healthcare workers win, but I also just won a case for 10 teachers who were reinstated with back pay when they said that their religious rights were violated, and we have plans to try to expand that to more. We're very systematic, and we're absolutely looking at the childhood schedule and other things. Health freedom is very important, and we absolutely need a litigation team or multiple good litigation teams that are vigilant and that are there so that people know they can't get away with it. But I just want to say something really quick about that. Another thing that I do when I'm not litigating is I teach part-time at Cornell Law School, and I'm not, nothing I say, by the way, is reflective of Cornell's position on anything. It's just my own beliefs. But I teach in the area of protest defense and civil rights. And I really think that litigation has to go hand in hand with the movement. And the reason that we're able to have all these wins now is because there were so many of you, freedom fighters, real medical freedom fighters out there, who stood up at great personal expense and said no. And that was enough to stop this machine. You only need, there's empirical evidence, you only need 3.5% of the population to sustain a resistance to an unjust law to be able to have the ability to overturn it.
Right.
So it really goes hand in hand.
Absolutely. Well, that's very inspiring. And I believe we have a caller on the line. Kyle, do we have somebody lined up? Let's see. We have on the line. I'm not sure who it is. I didn't get my message, but put him on. Sorry. There we go. I don't know. There was a little delay in the message I got. We have Noel on the line. Noel.
Hello?
Hey, Noel, brother, give us some fire. You always have a great call.
Well, thank you. I have to kind of pull rank on you. Miss Gibson, I met you on Staten Island, and I interviewed you for WBAI. Do you remember that?
I do. Hi, nice to talk with you.
Yes, nice to talk to you again, too. I have your number and information. I'll call you at another time. But I just wanted to say that I was looking through the MTA, the New York City Transit, and they're still saying for the people who work in their clinic that it's mandated for them to still have a vaccine, but everybody else is exempt. What do you say about that?
Wow. Well, I mean, I'd have to look more at it, but I mean, it sounds like that there could definitely be a challenge to that, especially at this point. It's just completely arbitrary.
Yes, and the last thing I just wanted to mention, too, is that Kathy Hochul, Eric Adams, and the Brooklyn Borough President, they all have backgrounds in law. How can they, like earlier during the conversation you mentioned, that you are not doctors, and the host said as well. So how can they suggest people to take a vaccine and they're not doctors?
Right.
Right.
And so passionate that this is exactly what you need.
Exactly. How can you tell me what's best for me?
That, they're not these people's doctors. So one thing that we are supposed to have constitutional protection around is not only our own rights to make medical decisions, but also the sanctity of the doctor-patient relationship to work with a doctor of our choice to make medical decisions with that doctor and not have some elite doctor be able to overrule them or second-guess them. And there's been a lot of cases that have protected that relationship, and suddenly that's also gone out the window. The Department of Health is not treating you. It would be malpractice to, make a prescription for you or tell you what you're supposed to do for your health when they don't have an individual relationship with you. They have no idea what's happening. So this is a great question. This is not, it's medically unethical and it's unlawful. They can make generalized recommendations, but they should not make mandates when they don't know what's going on with people's personal health.
And they don't have a background. You know what I'm saying?
No,
Ms. Gibson, you're a lawyer, but I cannot ask you to work on my Chevy's transmission.
Yeah, you definitely better not do that.
Right.
Yeah, no.
Okay.
Well, thank you, Noel. You brought you made a great point, as always.
Thank you, sir.
We have another call. We have Alex on the line. Is Alex with us?
Yes.
Oh, there we are. Alex, how are you doing today?
Oh, pretty good. I do have a question.
Please.
At university for a while. Now, back in the mid-'90s, they were having protests outside of Ramapo College, and they intentionally made the protests during school hours, or when you had most people had classes. If you missed class, you miss a class, and so you could protest, but you would miss class. And then at another situation, I was up Boston, up at Harvard University, and they said, well, you haven't been vaccinated, so we have to deregister you. You have to comply with the vaccine mandate. If you don't, you can lose your registration status. So I do understand why it's not a good idea to force people, just like that law. You said the person that got fined $5, that they shouldn't be doing that. That they should force people to be vaccinated, or you should pay attention to that, preventing that from happening. But, I mean, they have a lot of say in a lot of things. How do you, get through to something like that?
Well, that's the point, is that, under the Nuremberg Code, one of the rights that we're supposed to all have, a human right, international human right, is not just the right not to be forced, but the right not to be coerced. So someone shouldn't be conditioning a benefit, like being able to go to school, or getting really any benefit on your choice of whether to get a medical intervention. Now, if there was some really compelling reason that they could prove, like let's say this was smallpox, not COVID, and there was a raging epidemic for a few months, and they knew they had very good evidence that they could show that you were a danger, they would make some other accommodation. And we have all kinds of laws to dictate that, like what they have to prove to before they can exclude you. And it has to be based on real evidence and safety, not speculation.
But it
that's
seems
not
like
what
a lot
happened.
of it's speculation because
It's
there
all
is no.
speculation.
They said it was on campus at Harvard University. It was Mellow Colony or something like that. It was some kind of vaccine that you had to be required because you're living in a dormitory among other people that are international students. And so they're like, well, this tuition is a crazy amount. I mean, you're going to deregister me, and then I have to re-register with a fee. So it seems like it's coercion, but no one says anything. And they make a lot of money through universities because I'm up at Penn State now, and even the schools surrounding, if you're not vaccinated, say, for example, they have clinical studies done by the FDA or, sanctioned by the CDC and all the regulations of what the human subjects are allowed to do. So then when you hear a study on the radio about, this nut or this plant is good for your heart or your health, those people in those clinical studies have to be vaccinated in order to comply with the FDA-funded study through taxes. So
there's one of the biggest hurdles we've faced through this pandemic is that all of these basic rights went out the window. I mean, and it wasn't just coercion to get vaccines. It was your right to have a business, your right to speak freely.
Your right to not have an object on your face.
Exactly, Matt. I mean, there was so many wholesale, rejections of basic rights. Oh, not only that, the government was literally telling social media companies that they had to censor people and how. I mean, it's just such blatant violations of the First Amendment, of any kind of right you could imagine. They were just taken away egregiously, and people were kind of signing on for it, and courts were very hesitant to do anything about it, especially in the beginning, because they were worried that it was a pandemic and they'd be killing people or, whatever it was. But we can't just abandon our rights every time we have danger. That's the whole point of the Constitution. It is even in times of danger or supposed danger, real or imagined, we are supposed to have these rights nonetheless.
Right. Well, thank you for that. Alex, I'm sorry. We're just about out of time. Thank you for your call.
Okay. And doesn't seem like I'm...
Yeah, sorry. And Sujata Gibson, I want to thank you so much for being my guest today. I would love to continue this conversation at some point. Thank you so much for what you're doing on behalf of the citizens. And please follow Sujata Gibson on Twitter. Okay. She has great updates there. And, just in general, it's a great way to just exchange information. Follow me on Twitter, Jeremiah Hosea, JREMIAHHOSEA, Jeremiah Hosea, jeremiahhosea.com. Please check me out on Substack. And next week, we have another amazing guest. We have Jessica Rose, PhD. So, the hits keep coming. We just have amazing guests on this show, including today. Thank you again, Sujata Gibson. Keep up the great work, and we hope to have another conversation with you at some point in the not-so-distant future.
It was really my honor to be on your show, and amazing company. So thank you so much. I hope to talk with you soon.
Thank
Bye.
you. Have a great day. Yeah, I guess we're all done, right? I didn't realize.
When you walk with open arms towards